Let's take a second and go through the basic rod and reel setup that you're going to need when you come to the Detroit River to vertical jig. You know, the issue with vertical jigging the Detroit River, as well as like the St. Clair River and your deeper river systems, is that there really isn't a rod and reel setup, I think, that's stiff enough for the application. And so what I personally do is I make my own. Now, I like the RG setups from Daiwa here. This particular rod is very comfortable in my hand. It doesn't weigh very much, and that's important because you're going to have that rod in your hand all day. So what I actually do is I take a 6.6 medium action rod. It's the RG series from Daiwa, and I take an arrow saw and I cut 6 inches off the tip. I know that sounds crazy. You're taking a $100 rod and cutting it right away when it's brand new, but I take 6 inches off the tip and I put a new tip top on there. What that allows is it makes a much stiffer rod. Now, when you're fishing places like the Detroit River, you're fishing a fairly heavy jig. And my rule of thumb is that I don't want the rod to bend from the weight of the jig, so I use a heavier action rod. Now, like I said, I've created my own in this application. Now, the next thing that's really important is the reel. The one thing you want to keep in mind is to have a relatively small size reel. You put a bigger size reel on there, all it does is add weight to the setup, and then you find yourself getting fatigued halfway throughout the day. The next piece of the puzzle is braided line. Now, that's very important because braided line has no stretch in it, and that's very important for any river jigging situation. Now, this high vis braid that I have here is what I like. I like that high vis because I can see the line very easily. Now we're going to go all the way down to the end, actually where the jig is, and I have that high vis braid, but what I like to do is I like to tie a fluorocarbon leader. Now, a fluorocarbon leader can be a few feet long. That part isn't really important. The reason why I use a fluorocarbon leader doesn't have anything to do with line shyness. These fish only have a split second. They're either going to eat it or they're not going to eat it. But the fluorocarbon leader is there for if you get snagged up on the bottom. I want that jig to break at the fluorocarbon leader. It's much easier to break fluorocarbon than it is if you tie direct to the braid. So that fluorocarbon leader is kind of your breakaway system, if you will. The braid in the fluorocarbon is tied with a double uni knot. And the knot that I use to tie to my jig is just a basic clinch knot. Now, this basic clinch knot is very easy to tie. It's very strong. It's going to hold any fish that you're going to catch. I know that this knot's going to break before the double uni knot's going to break. What that allows is the jig to break off. I can retie the fluorocarbon leader and I'm right back in action again. So from the rod to the reel to the line to the jig that you use is all important when it comes to vertical jigging.